The way he talked, I didn't feel like this was his first time. It was like he knew what he was doing. He told me I was never going to see my family again. He told me he would kill me, like the others. These were the last words of 22-year-old Cynthia Vigil, who had just escaped the terrifying lair of the Toy Box Killer, where she'd been brutally raped and tortured for 3 days. In episode 3 of the most terrifying serial killers of all time, we are covering the life and crimes of David Parker Ray, the Toy Box Killer. Make sure to like and subscribe, and to have your say in the next episode, make sure to vote in the poll above. Now let's get into the video. Ray was born in Belen, New Mexico on November 6, 1939. His parents, Cecil and Nettie Ray, were poor and lived with Nettie's parents on a small ranch where they raised David and his younger sister Peggy. Cecil was an abusive drunk who lashed out at his wife and children. He eventually left Nettie and the children when David was 10 years old. After Cecil divorced Nettie, the decision was made to send David and Peggy to live with their grandparents on their rural ranch in Mountainair, New Mexico. Life for David and Peggy took a dramatic turn. Their grandfather, Ethan Ray, was nearly 70 years old and lived with strict standards which he expected the grandchildren to follow. Failure to follow his rules would often result in the children being physically disciplined. At school, David, who was tall, shy and awkward, had a hard time fitting in and was often bullied by his classmates. Much of his spare time was spent alone drinking and using drugs. It was during this time that David Ray began to develop his secret fascination with sadomasochism. After high school, he worked as an auto mechanic before joining the army, where he worked as a mechanic. He received an honorable discharge from the army. He often kept quiet about his crimes. However, years later, he told his fiancée that his first victim had been a woman he tied to a tree, tortured, and murdered when he had just become a teenager. Whether this was true or materialized out of his constant fantasies of bondage and torture is unknown. On March 22, 1999, in Elephant Blue, New Mexico, 22-year-old Cynthia Vigil, covered in blood, naked, and with a metal choker collar padlocked around her neck, was running for her life. She had no idea where she was, and desperate to find help before her captors caught up with her, she spotted a mobile home with the front door open. Cynthia ran inside, pleading for help from the shocked homeowner. The police arrived shortly afterwards and listened to Cynthia as she told her terrifying story of kidnap and torture. She told them that a man and woman had kidnapped her, enslaved her and raped her for 3 days. There, she was tortured with whips, medical instruments, electric shock, and other sexual instruments until she managed to escape. The bruises, burns, and puncture wounds that covered her body backed up her story. According to Cynthia, she met her captors in Albuquerque while working as a prostitute. The man had offered her $20 in exchange for oral sex, and they went to his RV. Inside, there was a woman who helped the man tie and gag her, along with placing a metal collar around her neck. They drove for over an hour before stopping and dragging Cynthia inside a trailer where she was chained to a bedpost. She then listened to an audio tape, describing what would be happening to her while she was there. On the tape, a man she assumed was David Ray explained she was now enslaved for forced sex, and she was to refer to him only as master, and the woman with him as mistress, and to never speak unless spoken to first. She would be naked, chained up, fed, and cared for like a dog. She would be tortured, raped, performed for friends while having forced sex with animals, subject to anal penetration with large dildos and placed in various positions which exposed private areas of her body. She was also warned that she was one of many enslaved people who had been held captive, and many of those who did not cooperate died. By the 3rd day of her captivity, Cynthia had been exposed to electric shocks, endured being cattle prodded, whipped, and had medical instruments and large dildos inserted into her vagina and rectum. She was hung up and raped repeatedly by David Ray. Cynthia was certain that soon she was going to be killed. She managed to escape after Ray left the trailer and she got a hold of the keys and unlocked herself from the chain. She tried to call 911 but was interrupted by her female captor. The two fought and Cynthia managed to grab an ice pick and stab the woman in the neck. She then ran from the house and kept running until she found the mobile home. Cynthia then provided the police with the location of the trailer and they promptly arrested Ray. After arresting Ray, the police found that his fiancée Hendy and daughter Jessie Ray had been complicit in the murders, and they gained a warrant to search his home and trailer, and what they found shocked and disturbed them. Ray's toy box contained a gynecologist-type table in the middle, with a mirror mounted on the ceiling so that his victims could see the horrors delivered upon them. Littering the floors were whips, chains, pulleys, straps, clamps, leg spreader bars, surgical blades and saws, as well as numerous sex toys. There was a wooden contraption used to bend over and immobilize Ray's victims while he and his friends would rape them. On the walls there were detailed diagrams showing different methods and techniques for inflicting pain. In Ray's trailer, the police also discovered a videotape from 1996 showing a terrified woman being raped and tortured by Ray and his girlfriend. With the publicity surrounding the arrest of David Parker Ray, considering the disturbing circumstances of his crime, another woman came forward with a similar story. Angelica Montano was an acquaintance of Ray's who, after visiting his house to borrow cake mix, had been drugged, raped, and tortured by Ray before being left by a highway out in the desert. There she was found by police, but there had been no follow-up on her case. Ray would often use drugs that would induce amnesia and memory loss in his victims, like sodium pentothal and phenobarbital, so they could not properly remember what had happened to them. After releasing some of the details about the woman in the video, she was identified by her ex-mother-in-law as Kelly Garrett, a former friend of Ray's daughter. On July 24th, 1996, Garrett, after getting into a fight with her then husband, decided to spend the night playing pool at a local saloon with Jessie. Jessie roofied Garrett's beer, and she and her father placed a dog collar and leash on her and brought her into his trailer. He then raped and tortured her for 2 days, keeping her on date rape drugs the while. After these 2 days, Ray slit her throat and dumped her on the side of a road. Miraculously, Garrett survived the encounter, but no one, neither her husband nor the police, believed her story. In fact, her husband, believing she had cheated on him that night, filed for divorce that year. Due to the effects of the drugs, Garrett had limited recollection of the events over those 2 days, but remembered being raped by the toy box killer. Once in custody, Cindy Hendy was quick to turn on Ray in a plea deal that included a reduced sentence. She told investigators that Ray told her about 14 murders that he had committed and where some of the bodies had been dumped. She also told some of the different ways Ray would torture his victims. Ray would put his victims in wooden contraptions that bent them over and immobilize them, where he had friends, dogs and other animals rape them. She also gave the names of the other accomplices, which included Ray's daughter, Glenda Jessie Ray, and Dennis Roy Yancey. According to Hendy, Jessie and Dennis had participated in the murder of Dennis's ex-girlfriend, 22-year-old Mary Parker. In their investigation of David Ray Parker's trailer, police found evidence of several more killings, including diaries written by Ray, where he detailed the murder of at least 50 other women. Despite the evidence, the authorities were unable to create cases for them. Though Hendy and Yancey both identified areas they believed Ray disposed of bodies, police found no human remains in any of these locations. It is believed that a serial killer who puts the amount of effort into his horrifying toy box and who killed numerous women over many years would likely have a greater number of victims. The many unidentified personal effects and jewelry found in his trailer also point to a greater number of victims for the toy box killer. We are still getting good leads, FBI spokesman Frank Fisher said about the toy box killer in 2011. As long as we get those leads and as long as the exposure in the press keeps generating interest in the case, we are going to keep investigating this. Though he was able to beat 2 of the cases put against him, the toy box killer was ultimately sentenced to 224 years in prison for numerous offences involved in the abduction and sexual torture of these 3 women. Jessie Ray received a sentence of 9 years and Cindy Hendy was given 36 years in prison. David Parker Ray died of a heart attack on May 28, 2002, a mere 3 years into his sentence. Thanks for making it to the end of the video. Make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this, and leave a comment down below of who you think we should cover next. See you next time here at Fact Generation.